learners, welcome to the today's session, and today's session is about cereal and legume foods. As we all know that the food which we consume are primarily driven from two sources. The first source is plant and the second source is animal. So in today's session we shall discuss about the plant-based cereal and legume foods. In daily life we consume foods and the basic objective of consumption of the food is to drive energy. Now for driving the energy, basically largely you are dependent upon the plant-based food product. And in that category, the cereal and legume foods are the major food component that we consume in our daily life. If you see the cereal and legume foods, proportionally they are higher in ratio compared to other types of the plant-based foods. Now, what are the other plant-based foods? For example, the oil seeds, sugar foods. So these are two primarily distinct foods that we draw from the plants, but their category is distinct compared to the cereal and pulses. And the pulses, why I am calling pulses? Because the pulses are the legume. So you can call in both ways, whether it is a pulse crop or legume crop. And the crop will give you the legume food. So the food which has distinct characteristics if you compare with the cereal foods that we will discuss in our today's lecture. And you will also see that what are the distinct differences in terms of the composition of the seeds of cereal and legumes, and accordingly what are the major factors which governs their food values. So to begin with, let us introduce the lecture. So as I have already spoken, the food substances are primarily composed of carbohydrate, fat, protein, mineral, vitamin and water. And the basic aim of food consumption is to draw energy. Now there are metabolic processes which are in our body, and after metabolism is over, the assimilation takes place and further biochemical processes are initiated to absorb the food and to make the essential components of food which are required for building the body and also to provide the energy for the body organs. So there are around 2000 plant species that are cultivated for food. Now here the base, there are many other plants also that can be consumed as a food material, but here it is only 2000 plant species that are actually intended to grow to obtain the food material. In wildlife you will find several types of the plants which are grown here and there at different places, say like mountain, valleys, on rocks, besides the rocks, around the rivers and other water sources. Those plants are used by different kinds of tribes, different kinds of habitants, and they use for different purposes. One of the major purposes are medicinal and aromatic uses. So basically if you see a plant is consumed as a medicinal entity or medicinal component, that is one way I can call it a food component also, because it substantiates the requirements of the essential elements which are deficient in your body, and because of that deficiency certain ailments, certain diseases are there in that body, and to rectify that problem of disease, people who are residing around such areas like forest and other places, they largely consume the plant-based product, in fact the plants itself. So those plants are not included in this category, but the 2000 plant species that are cultivated for food production. If you see the crops, food crops particularly, now what is crop? Crop is a group of plants having same nature, grown at the same place and time, and they are grown for a specific objective also. For example, rice. If one plant of rice is there, it is called rice plant. And if there are many plants at a given space of land, at a given time for a particular objective, and the objective is that to obtain the grain out of it for consumption, then the group of that plant is called rice crop. So we must know that what is the difference between crop and plant, because in today's session, the cereal and legume foods are drawn from the plants only. So depending upon the nature of the plants, their classification is also done. So if you see in largely the categories of the crops, field crops, this crop is particularly those crops which are grown in the field. Field means a large area of land, well prepared according to the need of the crops, and given all inputs like fertilizer, water, intercultural operations for making plant grow healthy and give better production. So field crops, example of field crops are all crops like rice, wheat, maize, barley, fiber crops. These crops are those crop plants which give you fiber. For example, cotton is one of the most prominent fiber crops of our country. Of course, other crops are also there like mesta. So jute, these are also crops which are grown to obtain the fiber, but they are not consumed. Of course, sometimes if you see in the countryside, you will see that the flower or sometimes the soft stems or leaves are eaten at the tender age of the plant. But primarily they are not called the food crops. Spices and condiments. This is another group of the plant through which we derive spices like cardamom, chili, turmeric. These are all crops which are grown to obtain spices and condiments. Fodder crops. These are the crop plants which are grown primarily to feed our animals, to sustain their growth and health. The particularly the domestic animals, we need to obtain such crops so that their health is improved. And if their health is okay or their health is better, then we are getting good production of the milk and milk-based products. Horticultural crops. These are the crops like fruit crop, vegetable crop, flowers. These are the crops which are grown in an orchard kind of arrangements. And the horticulture crops are those crops which are grown in larger areas and they are consumed in a more proportion compared to many other crops. Plantation crops, particularly those crops which are grown on plantation based or their acreage is more and their entire area is designated as a plantation to apply the inputs like coffee, tea, rubber, all these crops are plantation crops. Medicinal and aromatic plants, as I have already spoken, that there are many plants which grow in the wild areas, in non-habitant areas, non-human habitant areas, which are used for different purposes. And in that category, the medicinal and aromatic plants are the most important plants. But the human has domesticated those plants. Few of them are cultivated in the well prepared land areas like other crops like field crop. So if you just cite examples like lemongrass, basil, plants like adusa, so these are all grown in a designated places and their cultivation gives better remuneration to the cultivators. Sugar crops, the most important sugar crop of our country is sugarcane and beetroot. So these two crops are grown. Of course, we can obtain sugar from palm also, but these crops, sugar crops like sugarcane and beetroot, are cultivated in the land areas and their duration is shorter, so they can be cultivated yearly basis and they are exclusively used for obtaining the sugar food from them. Now, if you see India, because now we have discussed the crops, what are the crops? So if you see the title of our today's discussion is cereal and legume foods. The cereal and legume foods primarily obtained from the field crops. So if we are talking about field crop, we should know that what are the cropping seasons of our country, like Kharif, Rabi and Jad. If you see the Kharif season, sowing is done during May month and harvesting is done during October, November. So the most important crop of Kharif is rice. Rabi season starts with sowing during month of October, November and harvesting is done during March, April. The most important field crop of Rabi season is our wheat crop. The Jad crop, which is a kind of intercrop taken during the time left between the Kharif and Rabi. particularly sown during March and April and harvested during June, July. This is a kind of catch crop which are taken to catch the time lapse, the time which is there with the farmers after harvesting of the Rabi crop, that can be utilized by growing this crop, particularly mung bean and some kind of green manuring crops are grown, or fodder crops are grown during this period when there is a dearth also. So if you talk about the food crop, then primarily the mung and urd, the green gram and black gram, these two crops are taken during this month, primarily in the northern India. And in southern India, this particular season is not there. And in most of part, like if you talk about Chhattisgarh and Telangana, people used to grow rice during all three seasons. So you can just think about that this country is highly diverse in terms of its cropping seasons, and these cropping seasons are dependent upon the type of crop that is grown during a particular season. So, and again that crop is dependent upon the food uh, food food requirement of that particular locality. So these seasons are varying at different parts of our country. But in northern India, they are very intact, Rabi, Kharif, Rabi and Jaid. And the crops which are grown primarily are discussed as I have already told. So now coming to the cereal foods. If you see the cereal crops are like rice, wheat, maize, barley, oat, etc. The cereal grain is produced from plant belonging to Gramney family. If you read the botanical classification of the plants, you will find that the Gramney family consists of maximum number of the plants which are consumed as a food. So that is actually the cereal foods, and primarily the cereal grains are grown in greater quantities and provide more energy worldwide than any other types of the crop. If you see the worldwide, you will find several countries having only rice in their areas, like if you see the Philippines, the Cambodia, Java, Sumatra, all Southeast Asian countries, the rice is the major staple food crop, and rice means cereal. So they are consumed there. And if you see in terms of energy production by crops, different crops or different fruits, you will see the are cereals are outplaced compared to any other crop because of their larger acreage, because of their larger consumptions, and because of their larger production worldwide. If you see the structure of a cereal grain, typical structure, it has only three components. The first is bran. This is the most outer part, and cereal grain is one seeded indehiscent. Indehiscent means they cannot be splitted like the legumes, which I will discuss later on. So they are indehiscent. Caryopsis, monocotyledons. They have single cotyledon in them. And if you see their structure, they consist, the most outer part is bran. So bran consists of two part, that is the husk, and below it the actual bran. And the second and largest part of seed is endosperm, that provides energy like through carbohydrates and protein. Of course, protein is very less in the cereals, which we will discuss later on. And the bran, as we know, that it contains oil also, because there are certain oil glands. And the third and most important part of a cereal seed is germ. This germ is actually energy storehouse in the seed, which provides the energy to the growing plant, to the growing, emerging seedling. And through it, we also get certain nutrients like antioxidants, vitamin E, vitamin B, etc. So all three components, bran, endosperm and germ, provides the food component if they are consumed. A typical characteristics of the cereal is that it contains large amount of carbohydrate and a small amount of water and moisture. The protein lies near the outer portion, particularly below the bran. You can just see the structure. So below bran, the endosperm, and outer part of the endosperm contains protein in it. So fat is also found in small amount scattered through the entire grain, but most of it is found in germ, which is a tiny portion of the grain from which new plant sprouts. The mineral matter of cereal is found chiefly inside the bran, the outer covering. So if you see, largely the cereals are known for their carbohydrate content. If you see the composition of a cereal grain with respect to its food values, you will see that it contains carbohydrate, it contains protein. The most important protein which we obtain from wheat is gluten. Nowadays, you might be knowing that there are many people becoming gluten intolerant. So they are recommended not to eat the wheat, rather they should eat the barley and other low or no gluten content cereal foods. The fat is also present in the cereal foods. For example, the oat and corn, they contain good amount of fat. Minerals and vitamins are also present in the cereal grains or cereal foods, you can call it. So the bran consists of several layers. The fruit coat, particularly the most outer part, is called pericarp, and the seed coat is called testa, from which different kinds of minerals are obtained. And germ or embryo is the part of grain from which a new plant develops. The endosperm or starchy part of that grain is constitutes between 80 to 90% of the grain. That is why the cereals are known for the carbohydrate content. Or if you talk about the other part of the carbohydrate, that is called starch, that is a broader structural component of carbohydrate. So they are actually chief content of the starch material in all food components. Important food substances like carbohydrate, protein, fat, vitamins, mineral matter, and water moisture are found in cereal. Means the idea of telling this particular point is that the cereals are the important food material which provides most of the required elements for the human body. And if you see the cereal foods, their comparison with the other foods, primarily they are rich in carbohydrate or starch and low in protein and fat, but they also contains the mineral and vitamins. So since we had talked about the cereal grains, their structure, their food values, their types of nutrients in them, now let us discuss about the processing of cereals, how the cereals are converted into the food that we consume. So cleaning is one of the most important process or step of the processing. Simply by winnowing or putting in grains in the water so that the dead or the husk floats and that can be removed easily. So cleaning is one of the most important primary processing of the cereals. Grading is another important through which you can identify the better shape and size products compared to those which are not grown to that extent. And if you find uniform seed materials, then your food values will also be better. Drying is another important. Dehusking is the most important processing activity that is done for obtaining the rice from paddy. Means if you remove the husk, then you obtain the rice, and the rice is cooked and consumed. So dehusking is the most important processing of rice plant. Milling is another component through which you can with the help of grinding and milling, you can convert the product into flour, like wheat is converted. So baking is another component of processing through which you can convert the certain primary processed material like flour into product like bread and other kinds of product by using baking. So these are few important processes of the plants, cereal plants particularly, through which you obtain the food material. Now coming to the food products that we obtain from the cereals, the whole grain product. Now if you see the different kinds of cereals which are consumed directly, like oats, brown rice, popcorn, shredded and puffed grains, breakfast foods. So they are consumed like a whole grain, means the grain is neither crushed nor it is deformed, but it is consumed with its proper shape by doing certain processes like roasting or even some kind of wetting. So these are the few processes which are undertaken to make the whole grain as a food material. Now milled grain products made by removing the bran and usually the germ, that is embryo seed, like polished rice, wheat flour, cornmeal, corn grits, all these components are consumed as milled grain products. Baked products, as I already spoken. Certain beverages are also prepared like beer and other kinds of wines, which are prepared by fermenting the products. Like you might have heard that the most important grain, cereal grain, which is consumed as beer is barley. So miscellaneous products are also used, like directly starch also taken out, malt is also taken out from the products, and that is consumed as a food material. And it is also fed to the animals at their feed. Now we have discussed the cereal foods. Now coming to the legume foods. The legume foods are obtained from the crops that is called collectively as pulse crop. Now all pulses are legumes. This is a fundamental statement. And if you see the legumes, the legume foods are known for their protein content because they are highly rich in protein. So their grain are dicotyledonous, means they have two distinct cotyledons in them. And if you read about the pulse crops, these crops are called legume crops also. So vice versa, legumes can also be called as pulse crops, and pulse crops are also called as legume crops. And the food items which are obtained from these crops are called the legume foods. And as I've already spoken, they are rich in protein, but there are certain exceptions. They also contains the oils, like soybean was one of the pulses which contains protein, but their oil content is more than the protein content. The important crops of legume category are beans, lentil, red gram, Bengal gram, peanut, peas, soybean. All those crops are called the legume crops, and their grains and the value added products which are obtained from these grains are called legume foods. The term pulses are the dry grains of legume. So if you see minutely, the pulses are therefore excluding the green beans and green peas, which are considered as vegetable crops. So you can just think about that the pulses vis-a-vis legumes, and they are actually the dry grains. So if you see that the food component which is most important from these sources are dal, the pulses. So they are actually the dry grains which are cooked and converted into that particular preparation. And if their pods are eaten directly in form of curry, then that is called vegetable crops, that is called legume vegetables. But why I am talking about these things is that we should know that what are pulses and green legumes. So you can just call them dry legume and green legume. Dry legume is called as the pulses, and the green legume is consumed as vegetable crops. So some legumes such as clover and alfalfa are also used as feed to the animals. They are fodder crops basically. And split pulses are known as dal, as I have already spoken in India, particularly chana dal, tur dal, moong dal, urad dal. All these are called dal because they are dry in nature and they are cooked with the water and salt and turmeric and converted into that particular preparation which we consume invariably in our households every day. In southern India also, that is also a major component of the product like sambar. They are also grown in some part of southern India. If you see a typical structure of a legume grain, you will see that the grain has two distinct cotyledons. That is why they are called dicotyledons. And there are three structures you might be seeing it. The first is showing one grain, the another is saying two grains, and the third is grain with different structures, that is internal organs, with little elaborative sense, that is just to distinguish their different organs. So in first structure, that is unsplitted grain, that has hilum and testa and micropyle, only three part which are visible from outside of the seed. And come down to it, there are two part of the same grain, two cotyledons. The cotyledons has part like testa, plumule, radicle, and also these are the three components. And if you see the further elaborative structure, the bean seed is shown there. It has epicotyle, hypocotyle, radicle, seed coat, and cotyledons. Seed coat is most outer part, followed by the cotyledons, that is the reservoir for the plants which will grow from the seed, and epicotyle, which grows in the stem form, and hypocotyle that grows as a root of the crop. So you will see through these three structures the all parts of the seed which are there in the legume or pulse category. And this particular grain is converted into food item using different processes like cooking, drying, processing, and other process. Composition of a legume grain. It also contains carbohydrate 24 to 68% depending upon the type of legume crop. It contains protein from 17 to 30%, and soybean contains high amount of protein, that is 42%, and highest protein in the category of the legume crops. And proteins from legume is deficient in tryptophan and methionine and cysteine, and this deficiency can be made up by taking cereals and pulses together. That is why in today's session we have kept the cereal and pulses or cereal and legume foods together, because both are complementary and supplementary to each other in terms of providing us balanced nutrition. For example, if you use the flour of soybean and corn together, then you are alleviating the deficiency of different essential amino acids which are otherwise not removed if you consume either of them at a time. Fat content is also higher in the legumes, like if you see soybean, peanuts, they contain almost 21 to 50% different components as a fat content, and therefore they are used largely for the oilseed purposes. Pulses and legumes are rich in source of dietary fiber also. The food legume, invariably if you classified for their food qualities into following categories, like two categories. Number one, the legume which has energy stored as starch, that is red gram, Bengal gram, mung bean, means basically pulses which are consumed as dal or the dry pulses, and the one which is stored fat as oil, that is peanut and soybean, and their products are also consumed as vegetables, particularly the soybean. Oilseed legumes are major contributor to the world edible oil supply as well as protein rich diet and cattle feed across the globe. Legume food are the main source of protein and are 2 to 3 times richer in protein compared to the cereal grains, that is already explained to you. And pulses contain 20 to 25% protein by weight, which is double the protein content of wheat and 3 times of rice. So if you wish to take more energy from the food material, then you consume the cereals. And if you want to consume the components which are required for your bodybuilding elements, then the protein is essential component, and for that you need to have legume foods. So minerals and vitamins are also present in the legumes, and anti-nutrients. There are certain legumes which contains anti-nutritional factors, like but these anti-nutritional factors are detoxified or deactivated through process of cooking. Like if you see the protease inhibitor components like saponins, cyanogenics, glucosides, lethyrogens, etc., which are present in the raw grain, but once they are cooked, then most of the their anti-nutritional factors are deactivated. Therefore, they become suitable for the consumption. So why I am talking about this thing? Because in the cereal foods, there is no such existence of any component which are called anti-nutritional factors. But in legumes, there are certain like rajma and also lethyrus, they contain certain anti-nutritional factors. If they are consumed without cooking, there will be problem in your gut area, in your metabolic processes, and that also sometimes create major problem also. So therefore, by simply soaking their seeds, some of the anti-nutritional factors can be deactivated, but by cooking, most of them is deactivated. So what are the major processing that is done for the legumes so that we can obtain the legume foods? Mostly consumed as split dal, and dals are widely used in Indian food. They are also converted into snacks, like also prepared bread as misi roti, you might have seen, and used in different products like making papad, buddies, besan, sweet snack, etc. And certain savory products such as aloo bhujia, bikaneri, sev, moong dal are prepared from the dals. So these dals are not any distinct product. Again, I am telling that they are the dry legumes or dry pulses, and they are consumed as food material. Now, in order to summarize the cereal and legume foods, let us have the comparison of both. So if you see the cereal foods, they are rich in carbohydrate. Legume foods, they are low in carbohydrates. The cereal foods are rich in fiber, whereas comparatively the legume foods has less fiber. The cereal foods has less protein and fat, whereas the legume foods are rich in protein and fats. And the cereal foods are basically made up of single cotyledonous grains, whereas the legume foods are prepared using the double cotyledons, that is dicotyledon products. And mostly cereals are used as flour or cooked rice, and legume foods are used as dal and vegetables. And in cereal foods, there are less anti-nutritional factors, and in legume foods, comparatively to the cereal foods, they are having more anti-nutritional factors, but they are not of much worry until and unless they are taken with the safe preparations. So dear learners, in today's session, we have discussed about cereal and legume foods, and they are the major food components of our daily intake, and they are consumed ever since the human have started taking the vegetable or vegetative uh, plant parts, or the vegetarian habit has evolved. So ever since the human have started taking these food items. Thank you.